in 2.24, we will discuss some very amazing facts about the soul, about ourselves. But first, let's say our prayers. Om Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjan-shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesh Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vas Adi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Right, so today, what new things are we going to know about ourselves? You see, this life is a constant process of self-discovery. But when we talk of self-discovery, we usually restrict it to the discovery of the various material talents, the material potentials that we have. We do not go deeper and uncover the potentials of the real ourselves, that is the soul. Because the real potential of the soul is so amazing that we cannot even comprehend it by our material intelligence. Let's see what is this amazing potential of the soul. 2.24 Achedyoyam adhayoyam akledyo vashoshya evacha nityah sarvagatah sthanur achaloyam sanatanaha. This is again a beautiful shloka in which Srila Prabhupada is translating that the individual soul is unbreakable and insoluble and can be neither burnt nor dried. He is everlasting, present everywhere, unchangeable, immovable, and eternally the same. Now this might be striking a chord somewhere because the first part of this verse is essentially a repetition of the previous one. Nainam chindanti shastrani, nainam dahite pahavakaha, na chenam kledayante apo, na shoshayati marutaha. So, the first line is repeating the same things, that the soul is unbreakable, uncleavable as we discussed, insoluble, which means it cannot be dissolved by water, can be neither burnt nor dried. Which means that neither fire nor wind has any effect on us. Now, the second part of the sentence is what Srila Prabhupada is concentrating on in his purport. Srila Prabhupada says that all these qualifications of the atomic soul definitely prove that the individual soul is eternally the atomic particle of the spirit whole. So once again, Srila Prabhupada is thwarting the theory of monism, which means the theory that says that the super soul and the atomic soul are one and the same, and eventually the atomic soul is going to go back and merge into the supreme soul. So this is something that Srila Prabhupada is again challenging with a lot of gusto, because he says if it cannot be cleaved, if it cannot be broken, how come the soul can diffuse into the supreme soul? So this very theory is actually thwarted by these verses that Krishna is speaking. Now he says that he remains the same atom eternally. You see, the second line of this verse is so insistent in saying that the soul is unchangeable. It is stable. It never changes. It is absolutely stable in its constitution, in its properties, in its characteristics. So how can we believe that this soul will eventually merge into the super soul and lose all its characteristics, all its properties? See, Srila Prabhupada has used this verse to counter monism or Mayavad. Now, it's as Srila Prabhupada is saying, it's very difficult to believe how a soul can become homogeneously merged into another soul, that is the super soul, which actually means that the soul has no individuality, which is not true. Now, Srila Prabhupada is further clarifying that once the atomic soul, which is at the moment the Jivatma, that is we, which is at the moment bound by matter, or rather conditioned by matter in this material world. Now we see we are eternal atomic souls, but we are conditioned. We have a subtle body and a gross body, inside which the soul or we are living. Now till the time that we are bound in this material world, of course we are a part of this material creation, but the atomic soul, that means the Jivatma, does not belong eternally to this material world. It belongs to the spiritual world, which is compatible with its own quality. This material world is actually not compatible with the spiritual world. But still, we have been given these bodies to make it somewhat compatible. But Srila Prabhupada says, once we become free of this material bondage, the atomic soul will have a choice, either to remain as a spark in the effulgence of the Supreme Brahman, which means to remain, suspended as a spark, as a tiny atomic soul in the effulgence or the light coming out of the Supreme Person, which is called the Brahman, or he can actually go into the spiritual planets and redeem his eternal relationship, his Swarup, with the eternal personality of Godhead. You see, he's actually making a very strong point here, that the intelligent souls enter into the spiritual planets to associate with Lord, because there is no fun being suspended as a spark in the Brahman or in the light coming out from the body of the Supreme Person. So these, as we discussed in the introduction to the Gita, the transcendentalists are of three types. Those who realize the Brahman, that is the light coming out of the Supreme Person's body. Second are the ones who realize Paramatma, or that means the super soul living in our hearts. Those who meditate on the super soul or Paramatma living in our hearts, who is none other than the localized aspect of God. But the devotees are the ones who realize God in all his aspects, particularly as an aspect of the Supreme Person, a person who has emotions, a person who is willing to have relationships, a person who is willing to have loving exchanges with his devotees. So the complete realization of God is not only to realize the light coming out of him, not only to realize the localized aspect of Paramatma, in which he is present in every living being, in the heart of every living being, but also as that one Supreme Person who lives in Goloka, the ultimate spiritual planets, and has loving relationships with his devotees. So the aim, the goal of the devotees is that Goloka, this ultimate spiritual planet. Now, Srila Prabhupada is further going ahead in the purport to explain the word Sarvagataha. As it is mentioned here, that the soul is all pervading, which means the souls are present everywhere. There is no place, neither in this universe, nor in the other material universes, nor in the spiritual planets, that the souls cannot be present. Now, the modern scientists may have, an objection to this, because they may say that they haven't been able to discover the presence of life in the other planets. Well, they could argue that we have sent the missions, the spacecrafts to Moon, to Mars, and nowhere did they see people living, not people like us living there. But, let me take you on a small, let me say it's just a scientific journey to corroborate what is written in the scriptural text, to corroborate what Srila Prabhupada is telling us here. Now let's understand, how do we understand life on this planet? Of course, there are various forms of life present here, the ones that we can see, but the ones that we cannot see. So let's ask ourselves two kinds of questions. Is life that we can see only life present on this planet? The answer is obviously no. Well, we might want to think about that maybe 500 years before today, but ever since the discovery of the microscopes, we have been able to see a whole new world that exists in the microscopic realm. We know of, I would say thousands and, crores and millions of tiny living organisms, the bacteria, the viruses, the fungi and whatnot that are thriving right beneath our noses without our being able to see them, So in every tiny cubic centimeter around us, be it a cubic centimeter of air, be it a cubic centimeter of soil, be it our own bodies. In fact, our own bodies are also host to millions and millions of tiny microscopic living entities that we that we cannot see with naked eyes. We can only see with the aid of the microscopes. Number one. And number two, we could probably think of life being present in conventional habitats. Of course, we have been studying about life in air, life in water, but we tend to believe that life can only exist in very conventional sort of climatic conditions or environmental conditions. But do you know of certain living organisms which are able to live in places that our imagination cannot, begin to, I would say, comprehend? Scientists have discovered living organisms kilometers below the level of Earth, living in places which are highly acidic, literally living in acid, or living in conditions with very high temperatures, even in volcanic vents, in places which are, I would say, soaked in brine, which means very, very salty conditions. In fact, recent years, after 2010, in fact, a number of researches by NASA and other such science institutes have actually proved that the life can exist in conditions that we can't even imagine. In fact, NASA has created a laboratory which simulates conditions on Mars, which has environmental conditions exactly like those present on Mars. And they have proved that there are several organisms, particularly the microorganisms, which have been able to survive there for more than 2 to 3 years, which proves that life can exist in habitats where we have no comprehension about. Now, which means that life is more than what we think. Life can exist in habitats which we cannot see, and life can exist in habitats which are far beyond our scope of conventionality, which means the habitats which we think, we might think, how can life exist on Mars? It's too hot a planet. Or how can life exist on Jupiter or say Uranus? They're too cold, they're too gassy. How can life exist on say Pluto? There is no oxygen present here. But on this planet itself, we know of life that exists without oxygen. We know of life that exists in extremely cold conditions, that is in the Siberian ice. In fact, in the Atlantic, we have seen, miles below the ice, we have microbes existing there. So we have life existing in such habitats. We have life existing in fiery habitats, which means even within fire, there are certain microbes which can exist. Now that actually makes us believe that souls are able to inhabit every type of habitat, provided they have a suitable body which is compatible with it. You see, if an organism has to live in water, it has certain adaptations in its body, which means it has certain characteristics and properties in the body because of which water cannot rot its body and it's able to live there comfortably. Similarly, if there is an organism which is a pyrophile, which means which can exist in fiery conditions, it has a body which can adapt to fiery conditions and can live comfortably within it. So then who says that life cannot exist on Moon or Mars or even the planet Sun? Well, many of us would be, kind of seething with a lot of objections to this. Life on Sun? Do you know what's the temperature of Sun? Yes, I do. But it's only a matter of believing that what I can see or feel is the only thing that exists. Is that true? Well, our senses are very, very limited. And therefore, we need to look through the eyes of the Shastras. Shastras like the Bhagavad Gita. This is what is called the Shastra Chakshu, which actually make up for the imperfections of our senses to show us a world that would not be visible to us if we were to rely only on our senses. So here, in fact, in our scriptures, there are descriptions that tell us that life exists on every planet, even in Sun. Now, obviously the people who inhabit the Sun planet will have fiery body, which means they will have the fire element in their bodies in great predominance, just like we have the earth element in predominance in our bodies because we are inhabiting the earth. You see, if we open up our minds, if we try to understand what diversity is present on earth, what diversity is present in the material universe, and finally, what diversity has been created by the Supreme Creator, we would not put limits, as far as our limited senses are concerned. So here Srila Prabhupada is clearly telling us that life exists in land, water, air, even in fire. And therefore, in fact, it is known that the living entities inhabit the sun planets also and have suitable bodies to live there. And in fact, he writes a disclaimer, if the sun globe is uninhabited, then the word sarvagata, that means living everywhere, becomes meaningless. Why would Krishna say that the souls can live everywhere? Surely Krishna didn't mean everywhere, only on this planet Earth or only on land. Surely everywhere means everywhere. So that's a profound realization to make. And then finally, I would like to discuss a little bit about what is meant by sthanu and achala. Sthanu means stable, which means it is known that the soul is stable in its original swarup, in its original form in which it interacts with God in a certain mellow or in a certain ras. And achala means that the qualities of the soul are unchangeable. Now, elsewhere in our scriptures, it is told that soul has some very beautiful qualities. For instance, soul is ageless, soul is sinless, soul is deathless, soul doesn't feel any hunger, any thirst. Soul is eternally blissful, and the soul always keeps its promises. Also, the soul never grieves. Soul never grieves. Soul is never, I would say, grieving. So these beautiful qualities of the soul of us never change. That is the meaning of the word achal. That might bring us to a question. If the soul never changes and if it has so many beautiful qualities, how is it that I am not feeling these qualities right now? Now the realization here would be that I am actually identifying myself so strongly with this body that I am feeling what the body is feeling, not feeling what I originally am. Just as a person dreams, and in his dreams, he dreams something which is temporary, which is illusory, but all the same, he is able to have all that perception, however temporary, but at that time, the person feels, truly those emotions associated with the dream. For instance, if you are being chased by a tiger in the dream, you will be able to feel those emotions, and the emotions are very real because you're identifying, in the dream, you're identifying with your dream. And that's how, when we are identifying so closely, so intimately with the body, the material existence, we are able to feel the emotions of the body, of the mind so strongly that we forget that we originally are griefless, we originally are sinless, we are originally blissful people. This is a very profound realization. Actually, it's easy to say these things as a matter of jnana, which means as a matter of knowledge. But the realization comes with transformation. And that's what our Shastra says, that this is Vigyan. Gyan is only to know something, but Vigyan is to realize something, to transform yourselves by realization of the knowledge. So, in today's beautiful verse, we have seen that the soul originally is a beautiful entity with beautiful qualities, and it never changes those qualities. And we are able to see, we are able to feel some less than nice qualities because we are identifying with this matter, with this gross and subtle matter in which we are living. And therefore, we are sometimes grieving, we are sometimes sinning, we are hungry, we are thirsty, we are hankering, and all the, not so nice qualities are being experienced by us because of our association with this body, which is made up of matter. Also, Srila Prabhupada has told us that souls can live everywhere, provided they have a suitable body. And God has created suitable bodies for every habitat, much beyond our comprehension. So, with this knowledge, we will leave for today.